welcome to the Art of Being Human. We've been talking about all kinds of emotions, fears, phobias, anxiety, depression, and so forth, and we've been dealing with it in terms of PTSD. And so today what I'd like to do is I want to give you some helpful hints as to how you can deal with emotions when they come if you feel that these emotions are too bothersome for you. We all experience emotions. We can't avoid that. And there's nothing bad about having emotions, but some of them are healthier than others. Some of them are more painful than others to go through. So I decided it would be good to take a segment and deal with some helpful hints in terms of what to do if you are experiencing emotions. What explanations can you give to yourself that will help you over these emotions? And I think, you know, if I teach this class for over 10 years, this will be one of the most important segments to remember, because what I want you to know is what causes you to feel emotions so intensely and how you can get relief from that. So we're going to go into, for example, fear and anxiety. We'll take care of that first. Whenever you are feeling discomfort due to fear and anxiety, remember that you are living through, possibly living through, past pain. Sometimes when we experience emotions, we are living through past pain that has not been resolved. For it's definitely true, if you go through certain things in life and those things are not resolved, you don't get a resolution of them, then they will come back to haunt you again. You may or may not realize that some of your emotions are too intense for the situation that you're actually in. And in that case, if that's the case, then you are living through past pain. Past pain has a life of its own. For example, if you're going through a traumatic event, it may remind you of a traumatic event in your past. And when that happens, the past has not been resolved. You feel all of those same feelings that you had in the past trauma added on to your present day feelings for the trauma that you are now going through. You are actually repeating past pain. You are living through past pain. And it has a life of its own, and it can be very, very intense. So when you start going through a lot of intense emotions, intense anxiety, intense depression, intense nervousness, just ask yourself, am I possibly going through something, reliving something from my past that's not even in my conscious mind? You may or you may not be aware of what it is. If you are aware of what it is, at least you can say, well, I know that this reminds me of such and such that happened to me, and that's the reason I'm going through it so intensely. If you can explain that to yourself and know that, then that can give you some relief, because it doesn't have to own you. You can own it and just kind of dismiss it. But if you're going through a lot of anxiety and you don't know why, and it reminds you of something but you don't know what, and you have no conscious memory of it, that's when you have a real problem, because the feelings are very intense, they're very strong, and you don't know where they're coming from except for the fact that they're there, and the fact that you may be going through something, but your emotions are much too intense for what it is that you're going through. In that situation where your emotions seem too intense for what you're going through, you are living through past pain, and it has a life of its own. We have to remember, and this explains something about midlife crisis. We haven't gone into midlife crisis. I will go into it in time. But when you have a crisis, say the midlife crisis, all of the problems that you had before you hit the midlife crisis, if they're not resolved, come up to be resolved during the midlife crisis. The midlife crisis can occur usually 40s and 50s, in that age period. And what happens is that you're now halfway through your life, or you feel like you're halfway through your life, and you reevaluate your life, and you see the goals that you had. Did you meet those goals? Did you not meet those goals? If not, why? And you set a new set of goals in place for the rest of your life. And so life can be divided into stages, and each stage has its own unique problems and its own unique conflicts. And as you go through your life, you need to resolve those conflicts as they come up. If you don't resolve those conflicts as they come up, then when you reach that middle-age period, and let's say it's 40s and 50s, all of those unresolved conflicts come up to be solved. And when that happens, you can have a very, very severe midlife crisis. If you go through the problems of the ages that you've been through in the order that the problems come up, that's typical for each age. Every age has its own unique set of problems, and those problems get resolved in a healthy way. Then when you get to midlife, you don't have a lot of stuff coming up to be resolved, so your midlife crisis is a lot easier. In fact, you may not even consider it to be a crisis at all. But if you've had a lot of problems in your past and they're not resolved, when you hit that midlife crisis at age 40s and 50s and start to reevaluate your life, which everybody does, then you can have a very difficult midlife crisis with all kinds of emotional problems. So at that point, and all the way through our lives, problems that have not been solved come back to haunt us. And so therefore, if you are presently going through emotions that are difficult, and I'm talking specifically anxiety and depression, but most importantly anxiety, you may be reliving the past and reliving problems that were never solved. And so you may not be totally aware of what those problems were. You may have it all in your subconscious, but your subconscious is more important than your conscious mind, because all of that stuff is down there, and it affects the way you think, and it affects the way you feel. And if you don't handle it at the time it needs to be handled, it wants to be recognized, it wants to be solved. It's like a unit in itself, and it comes up every so often. So you get into a problem and your feelings are much more intense than they need to be, because you are reliving the pain of the past. We always relive the pain of the past, but we are much less likely to do that if we resolve the problems as they come up. So remember, if you're having problems with difficult emotions, think back. There may be something causing it, not just the situation that you're in now, but a past situation that you may or may not remember, which has some similarity to the situation that you're going on now. I know I've dealt with people who have had cancer, and supposing you had a tumor removed and you beat out the cancer, but now you're afraid. Every time that you get a bump or a bruise or a discoloration, could that be the cancer returning? And you go into a panic about it. And so therefore you take extraordinary care to take care of yourself so that cancer does not come back. Or heart trouble, this is even more common. Heart trouble, patients who become cardiac fears, they have cardiac fears, every chest pain, now that they have recovered from their heart surgery, from their heart attacks, every pain in the chest, is it my heart? I know I'm going to have another heart attack. Oh no, I can't stand this. And then you go into a fear about it, which increases the symptoms, of course. So you have to remember that emotions need to be solved at the time they come up so that they won't recur. If they recur and they're intense, it may be because you have not resolved what you need to resolve. It's very, very, very important that you do that. Feelings can be stronger than what they should be. Now I want to also mention here a second thing, anticipatory anxiety. If you've had a lot of anxiety in your past, something can happen and then you have a lot of anxiety for what is to happen in the future. You have an appointment, you don't know what it's going to be about. You have an appointment, say it's for a doctor. You are very, very anxious and very nervous about this appointment because you anticipate what it's going to be like, and that increases your anxiety. You don't go into it and say, okay, I have an appointment, we'll see what happens. You go into it fearing that it's going to be a bad appointment, and then you become anxious in advance of the appointment. Nothing's happened yet, but you're afraid it will. So you anticipate it. And when you anticipate it, it makes the anxiety worse. I know, for example, I've never jumped from an airplane. I've never done any parachuting, but I understand for those people who jump out of airplanes with parachutes that the second jump is a lot more anxiety producing than the first jump. And the reason the second jump is more anxiety producing than the first is that when you go in for your first jump, you don't know what's going to happen. People will tell you it's like this, or it's like this, or it's like this. But you don't know what it's going to be like. And so every experience that you feel, everything that you feel in that jump is a first-time experience. When you get to the point where you're doing your second jump, you already know what the difficulties are going to be, or what the feelings are going to be, or what the fears are going to be. And so you're more anxious for that second jump because you're anticipating it than you were for the first jump. And so it is, I guess, for surgery and for anything else that you go through. The second time around is more frightful sometimes than the first time around. So that's anticipatory anxiety, having an anxiety of something that's going to happen. It hasn't happened yet, but you know that it may happen, and it builds up an anxiety in you. And it may not be a realistic anxiety, because here again, you may be reliving something from your past that you don't quite understand and you don't quite remember, but you have the feeling tone. Remember, if you tell your brain that you're going to be afraid or that you're going to fail at something, according to your emotions, when you put that information in your brain, that has already occurred. So if you say, if I'm going to take this test, I'm going to fail this test, you feel like you've already failed it, and your emotions are as if you've already failed it. But anticipatory anxiety is basically anticipating something in a negative sense and having a lot of anxiety, and you still may be feeling something and reliving something from your past. The other thing to imagine here is anticipatory grief. If you know that a loved one is going to pass on, or if you have a friend that you know is going to pass on, you can feel very, very afraid for that. You can have a lot of grief from that. So, for example, when I knew that my grandmother was going to pass on, I started grieving right away. As soon as you find out that somebody's not going to make it, or it doesn't even have to be a death situation. It could be a good friend that's moving into another state that you may not see again. Any kind of loss can give you grief. It's not necessarily a death experience. It can be moving. It can be losing a job you love. It can be all kinds of things like that. Whenever there's a loss, there's grief. But when you know that a loss is coming for whatever reason, you start grieving that loss right away. Even though the loss has not yet occurred, you grieve it as if it has occurred. Now, this is called grief work. And it's good to have grief work completed. For example, you know a friend of yours is going to pass on. You are grieving in advance for that for their passing on. And so you start grieving for that loss before that loss has occurred, and that's anticipatory grief. The good thing about anticipatory grief is that when that loss happens, you have a lot of your grief work already done. And so the loss doesn't seem to be so profound to you. The loss isn't so grief-stricken. You're not quite as grief-stricken because you've already gone through those intense phases. When you have grief, it's extremely intense, especially the first few days. You can't get away from it, you can't function, and it's just simply awful. Well, you can go through all of that before someone that you love has passed on, or before a move has taken place, or before a tragic event occurs. You can go through that grief beforehand, and that's grief work. It's anticipatory grief work. And by the time that loss occurs, the sting has been taken out of it because you've already gone through that phase of grief that is the worst. and then the person passes on, and it's not quite as intense because you've already gone through it. So anticipatory grief and anticipatory grief work is important. So if you're going through grief and you know that somebody is going to be passing on and it's very difficult for you, or you know someone's going to be moving and it's very difficult for you, remember that that is grief work that you're doing, and within a few days it should start to subside, so that when the loss occurs or the move occurs, whatever it is, it's not as intense because you've completed a lot of that grief work. And if you can understand that and know what that is, it won't be as difficult to take when it happens. Remember that the brain cannot tell the difference between a real and an imagined event. If I imagine that I'm going to take a test and I'm going to fail it, my brain is saying you have failed it, because the brain deals with everything as it would be in the present tense. So I may fail that test, and the brain means I've already failed that test. Or I may do well on that test, and the brain is saying you already have done well. The brain can't distinguish between what we are kind of postulating as possibilities and what the actual facts are, which is why I say the brain does not know the difference between a real and an imagined event. If you imagine something negative, your brain is feeling that it's already happened, it's already negative, and you're going through the very real emotions of that. When you get into an anxiety situation, you need to tell yourself, this feels like it's real, this feels like I'm failing, this feels awful, but on the other hand, it hasn't happened yet. And so I have to realize that my brain has been kind of programmed to accept the awfulness when the awfulness may not occur. If you can remind yourself of these things, you may be able to ease yourself through it without, excuse me, as much intensity. What we get is what if fears. What if this happens? What if that happens? Well, they can be very intense because we are anticipating awful things happening. And when we say, what'll happen if this happens? And what'll happen if that happens? And you are looking at things in a very intense way, and it's always negative. You can reverse that just by saying, I don't know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. My brain does not know the difference between what's real and what's imagined, so therefore I'm not going to focus so much on the negative. Don't focus on it until it happens. If you know, for example, that somebody is about to pass on, then allow yourself to do that grief work. But if it's some situation that you're unsure of the result, don't put yourself in a position of just assuming it's going to be negative. Just understand that your brain can't tell the difference. And that, I think, you can help to ease yourself through it. Remember that you will probably have a fear of going through things alone. One of the things that bothers us a lot and makes fear and anxiety more intense is the fact that we may go through our fears alone, or we fear that. I was at a church once, and one of the ladies there had had an abortion, and she hadn't told anybody, and suddenly she just broke down. She wept and she wept and she wept. Now, I am not in favor of abortion at all. It's the taking of a human life. But she had had an abortion, and she was crying and screaming, and it was just very, very awful for her to go through. And so I talked to her afterwards, and I realized, and I talked to her about it, once that emotion has been broken, once you've actually said the unthinkable, it loses its sting and power over you. Once she could say, I had an abortion, and this is the depression I've had since, because women who go through abortions have terrible symptoms. They're not told what it does to their mental state. It does terrible things to their mental state. But at any rate, once that is spoken out, then the healing can begin. And I told her that. I says, you've spoken it, it's now out in the open, you're not going through it alone, and because of that, your symptoms will subside. They won't be as bad. If you're going to hold everything in and not let anybody know what's going on, then your emotions will be more intense than if you talk to people about it. So you have to talk to people about it. Let a trusted friend know, let a doctor know, and then as a result of that, or let a counselor know, then you will, the emotion will lose its power over you. And remember, abuse is not your fault. Abuse is never your fault. Don't accept blame for abuse. I run into it all the time. People who are blaming themselves for the abuse that they've suffered. It's not their fault at all, because there's no equal power base between a person who's being abused and the abuser. So therefore, just shed all thoughts about yourself being to blame, or if you'd only been a better person and all of that stuff. Just knock that out of the ballpark. You are not to blame for abuse. Just trust me on that. Remember also, some of your symptoms may be due to biochemical problems. If you are like in severe menopause or something like that, the emotions are very, very mental. They feel very mental, but they're caused by a physical condition. And when you have something caused by a physical condition, you cannot think it away. You think you should be able to. If I'm afraid, I should be able to think it away, because after all, it's a mental symptom. I should be able, with my mind, think it away, but you can't do it. If it's caused by a biochemical reaction, something being out of balance, hormones, glandular problems, whatever it is, or even if it's caused by medication, you cannot think away symptoms if they're caused by a biological problem. What you have to do is correct that biological problem with the help of medication or therapy, whatever it takes, then the symptom will resolve. If something is truly emotional, the way to get through it is the fact to remember that you may be living through your past pain that has not been resolved, and anything that happens to you may trigger that, and that you may be anticipating something that may not be right. You may be getting a false impression of what's going to happen, and so it's intensifying your system. So I think that there are things that you can do to help yourself through. I hope this helps. I think I'll close it here because we are running out of time. We'll be doing something else on the next segment. If you have any problems or questions you want to ask me about this, because I consider this to be very important, please feel free to email me. I will take up your questions and answer you on the air. Thank you for watching. Please join me next time.